Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today is day 32 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and today featured mainly testimony from Chief Dave MacNeil of the Truro Police Department. Chief MacNeil was on the stand from about 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. or a little after 5 p.m. when cross-examination was concluded. And so he testified for the bulk of the day. There was a brief foundational document presentation before Chief MacNeil took the stand or took the witness table. And so it was an interesting day. Lots has been heard from Chief MacNeil prior to his testimony today. We've seen Chief MacNeil in the news dealing with the fallout from the mass casualty events. Of course, the Truro Police Department is basically adjacent to the Portapique area, and so the RCMP is patrolling the area just outside of the town of Truro on all sides, and but in order to get from Portapique and from Wentworth, traveling down through to Enfield and Elmsdale, that area, Stewiacke, Shubenacadie, the killer drove through Truro, actually spent 9 minutes in town. We've seen video footage from different businesses and other locations throughout the town of Truro that shows the route that he took to go through town. And people wouldn't know Truro well. He didn't take the main entrance in from the west, but went in through sort of the old highway around the edge a little bit, but actually came through right downtown Truro and then out on the other side. So he was right in the middle of town, and in fact the Truro Police Department didn't find out that fact until a week later when they saw on the news some footage of the killer going through on surveillance cameras in the town of Truro. So it was quite a day. It featured vigorous cross-examination of Chief MacNeil. Chief MacNeil was great on the stand. He was unflappable, very stoic, answered questions in paragraphs at length, and was not thrown off by anything that came his way. So lots to discuss. And so the first thing that was interesting was that the day started off with about a 20-minute or so foundational document presentation about the Truro Police Service and about the killer's time going through Truro and the connection between the Truro Police and the RCMP communications back and forth. There was very little communication, even though this was minutes away from Truro where this was all taking place. The RCMP didn't really let Truro Police know very much. As things were unfolding in the sort of 10:30, 11 p.m. range on Saturday night, nothing was passed on. It wasn't really until I think around 1 o'clock when the first bolo, be on the lookout, was passed on. There was another one about 4:30 in the morning, but both of these notices to the Truro Police talked about the killer's vehicles. They didn't mention a replica vehicle. They mentioned a decommissioned vehicle as a possibility in the later notice, but it wasn't very specific. Certainly not thorough as to what the RCMP knew at the time they were issuing the statements to, or the bolos to, the Truro Police. So there wasn't a great deal of communication, unfortunately, really until Staff Sergeant Briers took over in the morning as the risk manager from Staff Sergeant Rahill, that more communication seemed to be forthcoming. Interesting, just a little point there. Of course, Staff Sergeant Briers testified without really any restrictions, was willing to be subjected to cross-examination. I thought handled himself quite well. But Staff Sergeant Rahill, on the other hand, needed the accommodations, or requested them at least. So just a point there. Now, one thing about the short foundational document presentation, now this is progress on the part of the commission, because instead of doing the whole thing by foundational document presentation by a commission lawyer, they do a brief one and then they go on to the witness. However, much of that detail about when communications took place, the fact that it was a week later when the chief found out about the vehicle going through, about the killer going through Truro, all of that was covered in the foundational document presentation. Why is that a big deal? Well, it keeps Chief MacNeil from saying these things, verbalizing them himself, and thus that being part of a newscast tonight or whatever, right? So you don't get those clips of Chief MacNeil saying it. It's just sort of the monotonous tone of the commission lawyer, senior commission counsel that gave the presentation. Perhaps designed to keep those things from being prominently featured in newscasts, which of course goes on to the general public. So Chief MacNeil was upset about a number of things, although he didn't appear upset or angry in his tone. He was just conveying what he felt and what the other officers under his command felt as well. The Truro Police have well-trained officers. There was a narrative going around at one point, I understand early on, where there was a question as to how well-trained the Truro Police may have been and whether they would have been capable of helping out the RCMP. Chief MacNeil says they're all carbine trained. They have, they have all of the hard body armor that you need under those circumstances. So all of that was fine. They work with the RCMP all the time at the lower levels. Constables are working on cases together because there's a lot of overlap of jurisdiction in the Truro area. And in fact, before 2017, the RCMP, when they had somebody, prisoner that needed to lock up in Truro, would use the Truro Police Department's lockup facilities. And so in that case, RCMP constables were in there all the time, using the facilities, using the technology that the Truro Police had. So they were all familiar with each other's capabilities. Lots of resources used on the part of the RCMP back and forth. Well, usually that the Truro Police, it seems, would be using RCMP capabilities, training, all those things. Never charged for it, never had to fill out a form or anything like this. And then after these the shootings and some of the criticism that came from Truro Police and other police services, all of a sudden, the RCMP is demanding forms be filled out, payments be made for all of these services that they used to provide for free. So that's a development that's taken place. And of course, the relationship has deteriorated mostly at the senior levels. And Chief MacNeil talked about that, most particularly this, Association of Nova Scotia Police Chiefs, which has made the extraordinary move of demoting the RCMP from full member to associate members, which means now that rather than being active members, they're associate members, so they can't sit on the executive, they can't vote on motions, that sort of thing. So it's an issue. And so it's a sign of an issue is between the forces. The other thing that came up, of course, is this criminal intelligence bulletin that was created in 2011 about Wortman by the Truro Police, and it was recalled by an Amherst Police Department officer who remembered it from years prior, alerted the Truro Police to it. At one point, the Truro Police was had a request from CBC and from Global News to give us all your information you have on Wortman. That was part of it, and so the discussion took place with the RCMP. Hey, guess what? We're going to release this. We feel that we're compelled to do so. And the RCMP tried in a subtle way, maybe not so subtle, to not release it. Chief MacNeil says it wasn't quite put so plainly, but there was a phone call, an unusual conference call with Superintendent Chris Leather and Janice Gray from the RCMP, where Chief MacNeil brought in his deputy chief just so that he'd have a witness to it, where the RCMP wanted to go through the Truro Police files, and Chief MacNeil declined that request. So that was that also is the source of some tension between the two forces. Another source of tension, and I'm going to come back to this at the end, in 2019, prior to of this, of course, the Truro Police had presented to Colchester County, the municipality was doing a police review, of their policing services. They have the RCMP there. It's all very expensive. They're not having a full complement of officers. They don't have 24-hour, 7 days a week policing. So they were going out and seeing what their options might be, and Truro Police taking over as a sort of a regional police force was considered one of those options, and they presented to Truro Police presented to Municipal Council on that. So certainly some tension there on the contract for Colchester County between Truro Police and the RCMP at the senior levels. Again, probably doesn't seem to be, according to Chief MacNeil, impacting the sort of frontline officers and their mutual relationships. So there's another issue that came up, and this was sort of led to the chiefs of police making their decision, which was, well, there was, of course, the shootings themselves and the, pressure that they were feeling initially to agree to a review rather than a full inquiry. Chief MacNeil wouldn't sign off on that. He didn't feel it was appropriate at all, and told Minister Fury that. Didn't appreciate being sort of pressured into trying to agree to a review instead of an inquiry. But the other one was from Deputy Commissioner Lee Bergerman, who was the head RCMP officer in Nova Scotia, trying to pressure the chiefs, including Chief MacNeil, into saying something about the Alert Ready system, to agree with the narrative that the Alert Ready system wasn't capable of being used for the purposes of an active shooter situation. Chief MacNeil disagreed with that entirely, said it was capable of being used, and was not prepared to sign off on any kind of a narrative that suggested otherwise. So some real tensions going on there, and of course, this all strikes a neutral observer, I would expect, as the RCMP looking to cover up what they've done and, try to hide some of their mistakes and practices from the public. Chief MacNeil was having none of that. Particularly upset, like I said, that he didn't learn until a week later that the killer had gone through Truro. And even more so, he said typically the RCMP, if they're coming into Truro, into the jurisdiction of the town to do anything, they'll let the town know. They'll give just a heads up. Hey, we're going to be there. We're doing this file. Or even if they're undercover and they're going to have firearms, well, they let the Truro Police know so that, nothing. If they get an alert or report of somebody with a firearm, well, we know that that's an RCMP officer or something. But after the tragedy, the RCMP was going through Truro, talking to different businesses, trying to get information on surveillance cameras and all these things, without seeking any cooperation or even informing the Truro Police that that's what they were doing. So that was a real breakdown in communication and relationships as well. So that's hard to say where that relationship may go in the future. Now, we've seen lots of discussion in the Mass Casualty Commission as it's unfolded about the trauma-informed nature of it, and particularly there's been criticism about the National Police Federation and the Federal Department of Justice seeking to protect police officers, particularly senior police officers, from being cross-examined. We've had officers testify by video, limited cross-examination, questions asked by Mass Casualty Commission lawyers, or just other sort of limits on that. Well, there was no limits on Dave MacNeil's testifying. He was open up to cross-examination. And two of the lawyers cross-examining him were Natasha Najawan from the National Federation of Police, who went first, and then bookended was at the end was Laurie Ward, the lawyer for the federal DOJ. And of course, to be intellectually consistent with their previous submissions that all police officers have gone through trauma and shouldn't be vigorously questioned, they held back on their questions and really didn't have many at all. I'm kidding, of course. They went after Chief MacNeil on several topics. His failure to lock down the town of Truro when requested. Well, he had an easy response for that. It was a panicked, last-minute, vague request to lock down the town without any information as to where the killer might be driving, where they think he might be, which of the many potential entryways into Truro he might be taking, any of those things, and with, a minute or less to, put the lockdown into place. Well, of course they weren't going to lock down. Of course, and then as Tara Miller reminded us all in her cross-examination after Ms. Najawan, there were other police forces between Portapique, other RCMP detachments, that is, between Portapique and Truro, which also didn't have any roadblocks or lockdowns or anything like that. So, containment perimeter set up. So that really didn't go very far, I didn't think, as a line of questioning. Miss Ward asked about the Alert Ready system and his knowledge and use of it, and tried to get him to agree that it really wasn't all that useful, and Chief MacNeil was unflappable there as well. Wasn't shaken in any of his testimony. So, very interesting day. As I said earlier, the Truro Police had presented to Colchester County about policing the county and taking over from the RCMP. I think you'll see more of that coming. Wouldn't be surprised if the municipality was much more interested in that even now than they were even then. And I suspect they were interested then just because of the cost and the lack of coverage. So we'll see what comes to pass. But watching Chief MacNeil today really, I think, reconfirmed for me. I've seen him in interviews and was very impressed by his sort of, very good communicator, forthright, straight to the point, not avoiding any questions. To me, it confirmed that he would be an excellent chief of the Nova Scotia Police, should that come to pass. A very competent and trustworthy leader, which is just what police force needs, especially at this time in Nova Scotia. So those are my thoughts watching Chief MacNeil testify today about the lack of communication between the RCMP and the Truro Police, the lack of communication from the RCMP. I want to make sure that's clear. And some of the other issues with that, and the sort of fallout from, in terms of the police relationships in Nova Scotia that's resulted from the RCMP actions during the mass casualty, and then subsequent to that as they tried to cover their tracks, I guess you'd say. All right, so that was it for day 32 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings. Back tomorrow with more witness testimony. And so I'll be watching then, and we'll bring you a further report. So thanks again for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.